Welcome to the Unraveling the Scriptures channel. Have you ever stopped to think about who the pharaohs mentioned in the Bible really were? Three crucial figures appear throughout the Scriptures: Abraham, Joseph, and Moses, and each of them had a direct encounter with a king of Egypt. But who were these men behind the crown, mysteriously unnamed in the Scriptures? Why? Today, we're diving into one of humanity's oldest enigmas. Who were the pharaohs of the Bible? Who was the pharaoh that tried to take Sarah, Abraham's wife, as his own? Who was the king that gave the foreigner Joseph absolute power over Egypt, only for his people to be enslaved years later? And the most feared of them all, who was the pharaoh who faced Moses and saw his empire crushed by the plagues sent by God? Get ready, because what you're about to hear isn't what you were taught in Sunday school. There's much more behind those hidden names. And maybe, just maybe, the real story has been hidden from us for millennia. From Genesis to Exodus, the pharaohs who crossed God's path. When people think of pharaohs mentioned in the Holy Scriptures, the first name that usually comes to mind is the ruler who confronted Moses and Aaron during the Israelites' enslavement in Egypt. This pharaoh openly defied God, becoming a symbol of resistance against the liberation of the Hebrew people and of a hardened heart in the face of divine signs. He is often popularly identified as Ramses II. However, a more detailed analysis of biblical chronology and historical records reveals that this association is unsustainable. The pharaoh of the Exodus was, in all likelihood, not Ramses II, but a ruler who preceded him. However, that is not the pharaoh we will discuss now. To better understand the relationship between the biblical patriarchs and Egypt, we must go even further back in time, long before Moses' era and even before Joseph rose to power as governor of the land of the pharaohs. So who was this enigmatic monarch? We are referring to the pharaoh who ruled Egypt during the days of patriarch Abraham, nearly 4,000 years ago. A ruler whose reign marked the beginning of a new dynasty and who played a crucial role in the political and economic reorganization of Egypt. His name, Amenemhat I. This pharaoh not only consolidated his power through administrative reforms, but also strengthened Egypt's borders and promoted economic growth in the kingdom. His story helps us better understand the context in which Abraham and his family interacted with the land of the Nile, shedding light on the events narrated in the Scriptures. Amenemhat I, or Amenemhes I, ruled Egypt between 1976 BC and 1947 BC, a period that aligns perfectly with the biblical timeline. According to the Scriptures, he was the pharaoh who had a significant encounter with Abraham, an episode that triggered dramatic events and an undeniable demonstration of divine power. The biblical narrative tells us that Amenemhat, unaware of Sarah's true identity, took her into his harem, believing she was merely Abraham's sister. However, this act provoked the wrath of the Almighty God, who sent plagues upon the pharaoh and his entire household. Only then did the Egyptian ruler realize the grave mistake he had made by taking the wife of a man faithful to the true God. Embarrassed and fearful before this divine manifestation, he not only returned Sarah to Abraham, but also bestowed gifts upon him and ensured his peaceful departure. This episode established a pattern that would be repeated throughout history. Pharaohs who underestimated the God of Israel ultimately faced severe consequences. Though powerful and sovereign in Egypt, Amenemhat I was forced to acknowledge that there was a force far greater than his own, one that transcended earthly thrones and determined the fate of nations. More than just a historical account, this event highlights a profound spiritual principle. Even the most influential rulers on earth cannot defy the divine will without consequences. An intriguing curiosity about this biblical episode is the distinction between the origins of Abraham and Sarah and those of the Egyptians. They belong to the Semitic people, descendants of Mesopotamia and the Chaldeans, while the Egyptians, including the pharaoh, descended from Mizraim, son of Ham. This difference was not only ethnic, but also cultural and religious, which explains part of the impact that Sarah's presence had in the Egyptian court. The Scriptures describe Sarah as a woman of unique beauty, so exceptional that she stood out among all the women of her time. Her appearance immediately caught the attention of the Egyptians, who, astonished, took the news to Pharaoh Amenemhat I. Enchanted by her beauty, the ruler decided to take her into his harem, unaware that this action would have serious consequences. Divine intervention was immediate. To protect Sarah and warn the pharaoh, God sent a plague upon his household, causing great fear and confusion in the court. Only then did the pharaoh realize he had made a mistake by taking the wife of a man associated with the true God. Regretful and fearing further punishment, he not only freed Sarah, but also allowed Abraham to depart in peace, guaranteeing his safety and even offering gifts in an attempt to appease the deity that intervened on behalf of his servant. Pharaoh Amenemhat I, whose name in ancient Egyptian was Amenemhat, literally means Amen is in command, or Amen is the command. He was the founder of the powerful 12th dynasty of Egypt, one of the most influential of the Middle Kingdom. The dating of his reign varies among scholars. According to Jürgen von Beckerath, Amenemhat I ruled between 1976 BC and 1947 BC. However, according to Nicholas Grimmel, he reigned from 1991 BC to 1962 BC. Regardless of the chronological variations, his reign marked a period of stability and political reorganization in Egypt, making him one of the most important pharaohs of his time. The story of Amenemhat I and his encounter with Abraham not only reinforces the grandeur of the biblical patriarch, but also shows how divine intervention shaped political and social events over the centuries. During the 11th dynasty of Egypt, the cult of the deity Ammon began to consolidate in the city of Thebes, paving the way for the rise of one of the most important pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom, Amenemhat I. He was married to Nefertitanen, his queen, and together they had several children, including Senusret I and Neferu III. His father was named Senusret, and his mother Neferet was a woman who lived on the island of Elephantine, located in the Nile River. Despite his significance in Egyptian history, the exact origins of Amenemhat I remain shrouded in mystery. There are no clear records of his connection to the nobility or the rulers of the 11th dynasty, raising the hypothesis that he may have risen to power on his own merits rather than through royal inheritance. Historical accounts suggest that before becoming pharaoh, Amenemhat I held a position of great influence. He is thought to have been the vizier and general of the last ruler of the 11th dynasty, Mentuhotep IV. It is possible that Mentuhotep IV, instead of appointing a son as his successor, chose Amenemhat I to rule Egypt after his death. Another theory suggests that Amenemhat I may have taken the throne by force, consolidating his reign and founding the 12th dynasty, which would become one of the most important of the Middle Kingdom. The names Amenemhat, Senusret, and Neferet became extremely popular among the kings and queens of the 12th dynasty. The adoption of these names may have been a way to legitimize the royal lineage and strengthen the power of the new dynasty. The trajectory of Amenemhat I shows us a ruler of uncertain origin but great influence who shaped the history of Egypt and, according to the scriptures, had a significant encounter with Abraham. His legacy has been carried on through his descendants and the strengthening of the cult of Amen, which would dominate Egyptian religion in the centuries that followed. When Amenemhat I assumed the throne of Egypt, he faced a great challenge, restoring order after the chaos of the first intermediate period. His reign was marked by a deep administrative and territorial reorganization, aimed at re-establishing control over the nomes, Egyptian provinces, and strengthening the authority of the monarchy. One of his most strategic decisions was the relocation of the capital. He abandoned Thebes and founded a new seat of government, Amenemhat Ichtawi, located near Memphis. The name of the city, meaning Amenemhat conquered the two lands, symbolized his unification of Upper and Lower Egypt. The chosen location also held political significance, as it helped consolidate alliances with noble families in the region. To strengthen the legitimacy of his reign, Amenemhat I sought to associate himself with the legacy of Sneferu, an ancient pharaoh of the 4th dynasty, widely recognized as a wise and just monarch. This connection was essential for consolidating the stability of the kingdom, which was still recovering from times of political turmoil. Moreover, Amenemhat VI implemented a practice that would become common in the 12th dynasty, co-regency. In the 20th year of his reign, he appointed his son, Senusret II, as co-regent. This system allowed the heir to take on important functions during the pharaoh's lifetime, reducing succession conflicts and ensuring a more stable transition of power. In the early years of his reign, Amenemhat II maintained a more cautious stance regarding military campaigns, prioritizing Egypt's internal organization. However, this approach changed when Senusret I was appointed co-regent. With the heir taking on military functions, the Egyptian army began to expand its influence, possibly penetrating Palestine and consolidating Egypt's dominance in the region. Amenemhat's reign laid the foundations for one of the most prosperous periods of the Middle Kingdom, ensuring the continuity of a strong and structured dynasty. His legacy endured through the pharaohs who succeeded him, consolidating Egypt as a stable and influential power. The pharaoh from the time of Abraham, the one who, according to the scriptures, spoke with the patriarch and took Sarah into his harem, met a tragic and mysterious end. It is believed that Amenemhat was assassinated in a plot within the palace itself. This account is based on contemporary sources, such as the text The Adventures of Sinew, a document written during the reign of his son, Senusret I. The text mentions that the monarch was killed while sleeping, suggesting a palace conspiracy that led to his death. His tomb is located in the necropolis of Lisht, within a pyramid built to house his eternal rest. This pyramid symbolizes the transition of power and the continuation of the dynasty he founded. This was a brief account of Amenemhat I, the first pharaoh mentioned in the Bible, a descendant of Mizraim and Ham, whose path crossed with that of Abraham, forever marking both sacred and Egyptian history. The story of Joseph in the land of Egypt is one of the most fascinating accounts in the Holy Scriptures, full of betrayal, trials, and redemption. It all begins with Jacob, the patriarch of a large family and father of Joseph. Jacob had many children, but he had a special love for Joseph, who at the time was one of the youngest before the birth of his younger brother Benjamin. This special love did not go unnoticed. Joseph's brothers, consumed with envy, viewed the father's favoritism with suspicion. The situation worsened when Joseph began having prophetic dreams, in which he saw himself exalted above his brothers. This only increased their anger, and they decided to get rid of him once and for all. One day, seizing an opportunity, Joseph's brothers set an ambush. First, they threw him into a cistern and then decided to sell him as a slave to merchants heading to Egypt. To cover up the crime, they deceived their father, Jacob, by staining Joseph's tunic with animal blood and making him believe his son had been devoured by a beast. Jacob wept bitterly, believing he would never see Joseph again. Meanwhile, in Egypt, Joseph was sold as a slave to Potiphar, an influential general of the pharaoh. Even as a servant, his loyalty and wisdom stood out, and soon he earned his master's trust. However, his life took an unexpected turn when Potiphar's wife, driven by desire and frustration, falsely accused him of harassment. Joseph, innocent, was thrown into prison, but God did not abandon him. Even in prison, Joseph found favor in the eyes of the guards and continued to demonstrate his ability to interpret dreams. This skill eventually became his turning point. When Pharaoh himself had disturbing dreams that no one could interpret, Joseph was called. With divine help, he revealed that Egypt would face 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. Impressed, Pharaoh not only freed him, but elevated him to the position of governor, making him the second most powerful man in Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. One of the most common questions among readers of the book of Genesis is, who was the Pharaoh that ruled Egypt during Joseph's lifetime? To understand this, we must first consider that Joseph did not live under the rule of just one Pharaoh, but rather 2 distinct rulers, as suggested by Egyptology, biblical chronology, and the historical timeline of ancient Egypt. By analyzing historical records and comparing them with the biblical account, we find strong evidence that the first pharaoh during Joseph's arrival in Egypt as a slave was Amenemhat II. This pharaoh had as one of his main generals a man named Potiphar, to whom Joseph was sold as a servant. During this period, Joseph earned Potiphar's trust and managed his household, but due to a false accusation, he was imprisoned. Joseph remained in prison for approximately 2 years, and during this time, Pharaoh Amenemhat II passed away. After his death, a new ruler ascended the throne, Senusret II. It was under the reign of this pharaoh that Joseph was called to interpret a mysterious dream that no one could decipher. The dream spoke of 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of scarcity, symbolized by the fat and lean cows, as well as the full and withered ears of corn. The impressive interpretation of Joseph and his wisdom in suggesting a strategy to save Egypt from the crisis convinced Senusret II, who appointed him governor of Egypt, making him the second most powerful man on earth, just below the pharaoh himself. Thus, by crossing the biblical chronology with Egyptian history, we can conclude that the most likely pharaohs during Joseph's time were Amenemhat II, when Joseph arrived in Egypt as a slave, and Senusret II, when Joseph was promoted to governor after interpreting the pharaoh's dream. This analysis not only answers one of the greatest mysteries of the book of Genesis, but also demonstrates how the Bible and history can intersect in a fascinating way, revealing surprising details about one of the most significant characters in the Old Testament. What we know about Senusret II, also known as Senusret II, takes us to one of the most intriguing periods in ancient Egypt. He was the 4th pharaoh of the 12th dynasty, ruling from 1895 to 1878 BC, approximately 3,880 years ago. The son of Amenemhat II, Senusret II, ascended to the throne after his father's reign, a period that coincides with Joseph's arrival in Egypt, according to biblical accounts. This context already positions his reign as a key piece in the connection between Egypt and foreign peoples, especially the Semites, who had a significant presence in the region during this time. One of the most fascinating aspects of Senusret II is his relationship with the Semitic peoples. During his reign, the Beni Hassan chief welcomed a Semitic leader, an event so notable that it was recorded in the murals of Beni Hassan. These representations are of great historical importance because they are some of the earliest known images of the Semitic peoples, also referred to as the Hyksos by the Egyptians, or Hyksos, rulers of foreign lands. These murals depict not only their clothing and features, but also their arrival in Egypt during a period of intense cultural and commercial interactions. Specifically, the murals show Arameans visiting Egypt, a rare and valuable visual record that helps us understand how these peoples were viewed and represented by the Egyptians. Following the tradition of the 12th dynasty, Senusret II ruled for 3 years as co-regent, alongside his father, Amenemhat II. During this period, several commercial expeditions took place. One of the most important records is an inscription found on rocks at the Egyptian Red Sea port, detailing a commercial journey to the eastern coast of Africa. After assuming the throne alone, Senusret II showed a strategic interest in regions crucial to Egypt's economy. Early in his reign, fortresses in Lower Nubia, built by his grandfather, were inspected and reinforced. Around the 6th year of his reign, he ordered the construction of a fortress at Aniba, near the rich gold deposits of Nubia. Stelae and commemorative inscriptions document this achievement, highlighting the extraction of diorite, copper, and amethyst in various parts of this region. Another important aspect of his reign was the maintenance of diplomatic and commercial contacts with the Middle East, particularly with Syria and the Arameans. The famous scene of Semitic traders, Arameans, in a provincial tomb at Beni Hassan reinforces this connection, showing that the presence of these peoples in Egypt was significant and well documented. Senusret II's reign was marked by advances in administration, trade, and Egyptian infrastructure, as well as a period of great interaction with foreign cultures. His policy of expansion and commercial integration, particularly with Nubia and the Middle East, strengthened Egypt economically and expanded its influence. Additionally, The records left by his reign, such as the murals at Beni Hassan, remain an invaluable source for historians seeking to understand not only Egyptian society, but also Egypt's interaction with other peoples of the time. During Sesostris II's reign, the Egyptian nobility further strengthened its position through strategic marital alliances with neighboring Middle Eastern peoples. These unions primarily involved Aramaic tribes, but also included other Semitic peoples from the region. As a result, a process of miscegenation between native Egyptians and these foreign populations began, something many may not associate with ancient Egypt. This cultural and ethnic exchange was an important factor in the evolution of Egyptian society at the time, bringing new influences and modifying aspects of the nobility and local politics. One fascinating detail for those studying both Egyptology and biblical chronology is that Sesostris II is believed to have died during the first 7 years of prosperity in Egypt, mentioned in the famous dream of the pharaoh interpreted by Joseph. With his death, he was succeeded by his son, Sesostris III, one of the most notable pharaohs of the 12th dynasty. Here's an interesting point. There are strong indications that it was Sesostris III who invited Jacob, Israel, and his family to settle in Egypt, marking the beginning of the Israelite presence in the land of the pharaohs. Another surprising detail is that Jacob is said to have blessed Sesostris III, as mentioned in Genesis 47, where it is stated that Jacob gave a blessing to the pharaoh of his time. Considering the archaeological and chronological evidence, this figure could very well have been Sesostris III. If Sesostris II died during the 7 years of abundance, then it fell to Sesostris III to face the 7 years of famine that followed. Interestingly, ancient Egyptian records describe the reign of Sesostris III as a turbulent period, marked by rebellions, conflicts, and social unrest. It is believed that this crisis was caused by food scarcity and severe economic difficulties, which perfectly aligns with the biblical narrative of the 7 years of famine that devastated the region. This correlation between the events described in the Old Testament and the records of Egyptology sheds light on the possible connection between the reign of Sesostris III and the management of the crisis under Joseph's guidance, who, according to the Bible, was responsible for administering Egypt's resources during this period of adversity. The account in the book of Genesis, chapter 47, describes how Pharaoh Sesostris II's dream was fulfilled during the 7 years of famine, a devastating period that affected both Egypt and Canaan. In verse 13, it highlights that there was no food throughout the land, as the famine had become extremely severe. The people of both countries were without resources to feed themselves. Joseph then gathered all the silver circulating in Egypt and Canaan, which had been used to pay for grain, and transferred it to Pharaoh's palace, which in this case was Pharaoh Sesostris III. When all the silver was exhausted, the Egyptians, desperate, approached Joseph and begged, "Give us bread, for we will die before you, since we have no money left." Joseph then instructed them to bring their livestock, offering them grain in exchange for animals, as money no longer existed. So the people brought their horses, sheep, cattle, and donkeys, and Joseph provided them with bread in exchange for these herds. When that year ended, they returned, saying, "We cannot hide from you, O my lord, that our money is gone and all our livestock are now yours. What do we have left to offer, except our bodies and our lands, which are barren? Do not let us die from hunger. Buy us and our land in exchange for grain, and we, with our land, will be Pharaoh's slaves. Give us seed so that we may survive and not die, and that the land may not become desolate." Joseph then bought all the land in Egypt for Pharaoh, as the people, struck by famine, sold their properties and even themselves. Thus the land became entirely Pharaoh's. In verse 24, it is stipulated that after purchasing the land, the people would give 1/5 of the harvest to Pharaoh, keeping the other 4 parts to sow, feed themselves, and support their families. The people acknowledged Joseph's provision, saying, "You have saved our lives, and we will forever be Pharaoh's slaves." Therefore, the reign of Sesostris III was greatly strengthened thanks to Joseph's administration. Even during a time of extreme famine and misery, the pharaoh prospered. The identity of the pharaoh mentioned in the book of Exodus has been the subject of intense debate throughout history. He was the ruler who challenged God, had his heart hardened, and refused to free the Israelite slaves, triggering the plagues that ravaged Egypt. The Bible, one of the ancient texts that most frequently mentions Egyptian civilization, refers to various pharaohs at different times, including the one who interacted with Abraham, the one who elevated Joseph to a position of prominence, and of course, the one who faced Moses. A widely held belief, reinforced by films and TV shows, associates the Pharaoh of the Exodus with Ramses II, one of the most famous rulers of ancient Egypt. However, this identification presents inconsistencies, particularly regarding the biblical chronology. According to the scriptures, the traditional date of the Exodus does not align with Ramses II's reign, making it unlikely that he was the pharaoh mentioned. Additionally, scholars suggest other possibilities, proposing that the true pharaoh of the Exodus might have been a lesser-known ruler who better fits the historical context and the events described. Among the names frequently mentioned are Thutmose from the Hyksos dynasty and Amenemhat II, whose profile aligns with some of the biblical descriptions. The search for this identity is not just a matter of historical curiosity, but also a fundamental element in understanding the geopolitical and religious context of the time. As we delve deeper into this investigation, we realize that identifying the Pharaoh of the Exodus goes beyond popular narratives and requires a thorough analysis of historical, archaeological, and theological sources. After all, understanding who truly ruled Egypt during that period could shed new light on one of the most significant events in the Bible and in human history. The pharaoh who faced Moses and Aaron has been the subject of intense debates, but a significant archaeological discovery casts doubt on the traditional association of this ruler with Ramses II. This interpretation, widely spread by cinema and some academic perspectives, proves to be incorrect for several reasons. First, Ramses II did not engage in any battle against slaves or servants of Semitic origin within Egypt. Furthermore, historical records indicate that during his time, the Semitic presence in Egyptian territory was not as large as commonly assumed, which weakens this theory even further. One of the most intriguing discoveries that challenges this conventional view is the Amenemhat stele, a monument of extreme historical relevance. This artifact, belonging to Pharaoh Amenemhat, the son and successor of Ramses II, contains one of the first mentions of Israel outside the Bible. The inscription reports the military campaigns of the pharaoh and explicitly mentions Israel as an established and organized entity in Canaan, rather than as a people enslaved in Egypt or a nomadic group without a defined identity. This archaeological evidence is crucial, as it suggests that by Amenemhat's time, the Israelites were already outside Egypt, contradicting the theory that Ramses II was the pharaoh of the Exodus. Another relevant point is the dating of the Amenemhat stele, estimated to be from 1207 BCE. This detail is essential because it establishes a temporal marker that reinforces the idea that the Exodus must have occurred before this period. If the Israelites were already settled in Canaan by this time, their departure from Egypt must have happened at least several decades earlier, during the reign of a previous pharaoh. The Israelites had already established themselves in the land of Canaan, were stabilized, and had overcome 40 years in the desert. During this period, they faced Canaanite peoples and conquered their lands. The territorial markers of the Israelites in Canaan suggest that for all of this to have occurred, Moses' era must have been at least 150 years before Amenemhat's reign. This conclusion is based on the need for a significant period for the Israelites to settle and consolidate in the land of Canaan before Amenemhat's arrival in Egypt and his confrontation with them as a fully structured people. This evidence challenges the theory that Ramses II was the pharaoh mentioned in the book of Exodus. Instead, it points to the possibility that the pharaoh during Moses' time could have been Thutmose III. Thutmose III, also known as Thutmosis or Thutmose III, was one of the most notable pharaohs of ancient Egypt, belonging to the 18th dynasty, circa 1479 to 1425 BCE. Known as the Napoleon of Egypt due to his military genius and the vast territorial expansion he promoted, Thutmose III is considered one of the greatest strategists in Egyptian history. During his reign, he conducted numerous successful military campaigns, consolidating Egypt as a superpower of the time. Initially, Thutmose III ascended to the throne at a young age, after the death of his stepmother, the powerful Queen Hatshepsut, one of the few women to rule Egypt as pharaoh. At the beginning of his reign, his authority was partially limited by advisors loyal to the former ruler, but over time, he consolidated his power and began an era of expansion and prosperity for Egypt. In addition to his military conquests, Thutmose III was also a great administrator and patron of the arts and architecture, promoting the construction of temples and monuments that exalted the glory of the Egyptian empire. If the hypothesis that he was the pharaoh during Moses' time is correct, it would reframe the traditional interpretation of biblical events, suggesting a different historical context for the Exodus and raising new questions about the relationship between Egypt and Israel in ancient times. Thutmose III's most famous military campaign was the Battle of Megiddo, fought around 1457 BC. This battle is notable for being one of the first in history to be extensively recorded, with accounts carved into the walls of the Karnak temple. Thutmose III described the strategy, challenges, and Egyptian victory, showcasing not only his skill as a warrior, but also his talent as a strategist. The victory at Megiddo consolidated Egyptian control over a vast portion of the Levant, securing tributes and strengthening the empire's influence in the region. In addition to his military feats, Thutmose III was also known as a great builder. During his reign, he ordered the construction of temples, obelisks, and monuments that extolled not only his glory, but also the greatness of his pagan Egyptian gods. He was a fervent devotee of the deities of the Egyptian pantheon, promoting religious reforms and expanding temples dedicated to Amun-Ra, to whom he attributed his victories and achievements. As archaeological research advances, new evidence continues to shed light on the events and figures of antiquity, offering more precise interpretations of biblical times. If Thutmose III was indeed the pharaoh during Moses' time, it would drastically change the way we understand the Exodus narrative, bringing a new perspective on the interaction between Egypt and the Hebrews. An intriguing detail in this hypothesis is the very name Thutmose. In Egyptian, it means born of Thoth or son of Thoth, referring to the deity of wisdom and writing. If this was the pharaoh who confronted Moses and God, the meaning of his name adds a new layer of symbolism to the conflict. On one side, Moses, guided by the God of the Hebrews; on the other, a ruler whose name bears the mark of one of the Egyptian gods. It is interesting to note that the names Thutmose and Moses share a remarkable phonetic similarity, especially in the prefix Tut, which refers to a naming style common in the 18th dynasty of Egypt. In fact, in the culture of the time, the inclusion of a divine or royal name was a common practice, indicating lineage, destiny, or spiritual protection. This reinforces the theory that the name Moses was not originally Hebrew, but Egyptian, reflecting the linguistic and cultural tradition of the period. The meaning of the name Moses also raises interesting questions. Contrary to the idea that it may have Hebrew or Phoenician roots, his name was supposedly given by the pharaoh's daughter when she found him in the waters of the Nile, as described in the biblical account. In Egyptian, the suffix s or sis was a common element in royal names and often meant son of or born of, appearing in names like Ramses, son of Ra, and Thutmose, born of Thoth. Curiously, in ancient Aramaic, Moses was pronounced as Mushi, a variation that further reinforces the Egyptian linguistic influence on the prophet's identity. In ancient Egypt, choosing a name was a profoundly significant act. The Egyptians believed that a person's name contained life force and influenced their destiny both in life and in eternity. The first name, or given name, was often selected based on factors such as birth conditions, celestial events, prophecies, or the parents' aspirations for the child. It was not uncommon for names to be associated with deities. The ancient Hebrew Phoenician version of the name Moses is Moshe, and both share a similar meaning, translated as taken from the waters or son of the waters. An intriguing detail is the similarity between the SS ending in the name Ramses and the structure of the name Moses, as both indicate son of. This parallel suggests a possible linguistic connection between the names, reinforcing the idea that Moses may have had an Egyptian origin name that later underwent modifications. The presence of the S's ending, meaning son of, leads to the hypothesis that Moses's original name was adapted due to the influences of the Egyptian religious context. Considering that the pharaoh's daughter found him in the Nile River, it is plausible that she chose a name inspired by deities associated with water, reflecting both the child's origin and the religious beliefs of the time. Regarding chronology, there are indications that Moses lived around 1500 BC or 1480 BC, instead of the traditional dating of 1200 BC. This temporal reassessment aligns with the possibility of his existence during the reign of pharaohs such as Thutmose III. During this period, events linked to Moses' leadership in the liberation of the Hebrews and the divine intervention described in the scriptures would have occurred. The analysis of Thutmose III's tomb and other archaeological evidence further complicates this discussion, requiring a detailed examination to better understand the true chronology of events. We can find various pieces of evidence that reinforce the credibility of the biblical account described in the Book of Exodus, particularly when analyzing the tomb of Pharaoh Thutmose III. Among the records, there are mentions of a great flood, often associated with the episode of the Red Sea crossing, when, according to the biblical narrative, the Hebrew people escaped Egyptian oppression. An intriguing aspect of this discovery is the absence of Thutmose III's mummy in his own tomb. In its place, the body of a significantly younger individual was found, raising questions about the fate of the pharaoh and possible connections to the events narrated in Exodus. Additionally, archaeological finds, such as ancient Egyptian war chariot wheel axles found at the bottom of the Red Sea, and other artifacts dated to the period, provide additional clues that support the historicity of this event. These findings, along with other evidence from biblical archaeology, strengthen the legitimacy of the sacred scriptures and corroborate the possibility that events such as the Red Sea crossing have a real historical basis. By integrating historical accounts and archaeological discoveries, it is possible to establish new perspectives on the authenticity of biblical texts and their impact throughout the ages. It is worth noting that Thutmose III's tomb not only indicates the occurrence of the flood, but also suggests the possible tragedy that befell the pharaoh, whose fate may have been sealed in the Red Sea. In this video, you saw how the encounters between Abraham, Joseph, and Moses with the pharaohs of Egypt reveal much more than simple historical accounts. They are fragments of a buried truth, records that show power plays, millennia-old manipulations, and decisions that shaped not only the destiny of a people, but the course of humanity itself. The omission of names, the supernatural events, the abrupt changes of power, all of this points to a narrative much larger than official history dares to admit. And this story does not end here. Keep watching. The next video will take you even deeper behind the scenes of time, where hidden documents, forgotten lineages, and much more await you. May God bless and see you soon.